Today, exactly today, there are 4 astronauts going up in a rocket to the moon. I mean, it was supposed to be today, Saturday, February 7th, 2026, but the launch was postponed. So if there's no flat tire, if they don't run out of fuel, if the radiator doesn't overheat, maybe that rocket will go up in March or April this year. Then you must have heard about the Artemis program. It's a program by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration from the United States to take humans back to the moon more than 50 years later. And yes, there's a flight scheduled for this year where 4 astronauts will orbit our natural satellite and come back. Yeah, we hope they come back. But anyway, the first time humans went to the moon was in 1969, during the Apollo program on this big rocket. Here, the Saturn V, which we've already explained to you how it works. And the last time humans set foot on the moon was in 1972. A little after that, and since then, no one has ever gone back there. There was this mission at the end of the 1960s, because there was a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to see who had more technology, who had more capability to dominate space. We called this the space race at the time. So, back then, it made sense to spend a mountain of money to go to the moon. But after they got there and went 6 times, it started to lose its appeal. And since then, the United States decided it wasn't worth spending money sending people to the moon anymore. And that's why we've never gone back there, even though technology has evolved a lot. But now we're kind of having a space race again, because there's a possibility of going to Mars. There's a possibility of us colonizing the moon, setting up a permanent base there. So, once again, the United States wants to get to the moon, and that's why the Artemis program was created. This time, we're not going to get there with the Saturn V anymore. It's going to be with this beauty here that we just printed at a 1:100 scale. Oh my god, it's already falling apart, and it hasn't even flown yet. Even though we printed it at a 1:100 scale, that means each centimeter here corresponds to 1 meter in real life. Okay, we even printed a human figure, so you can get an idea of the size of this thing. The rocket is 98 meters tall, so this here is a person who is 1.80 meters, okay? Next to this monstrosity, and that's about the same as a 30-story building. Even so, it's not bigger than Saturn V. It's a few meters shorter, but it's more powerful, about 15% more powerful. The idea of this video is for you to be able to follow the rocket launch when it happens and understand everything that's there. So, I'll be showing how the journey will be, and we'll be understanding a bit more about this Artemis 2 mission. In 2021, we had Artemis 1. It was the first time this rocket was launched, but it was an uncrewed mission, a mission completely controlled remotely by robots and so on. It wasn't as exciting as it will be now with people returning to the moon. Before we go, let's make sure we have these names right, okay? The name of this rocket here is Space Launch System, which stands for Space Launch System. There's not much creativity. The name of the program as a whole, meaning the entire organization of these trips to the moon, is Artemis because it's based on a Greek goddess. She was the goddess of hunting in the moon and the sister of Apollo, the name given to the mission in the 60s and 70s. And here at the tip, we have a third name, which is the Orion spacecraft. Usually, we name the rocket one thing and the tip another. In this case, the spacecraft was actually called Apollo as well. Yeah, they lacked creativity once again. The plan is to launch this rocket from Kennedy Space Center, where the Saturn V launched, and where we filmed the Let's See video explaining the rocket. One of the tense parts of the launch is filling all of this up with fuel. In this case, it's liquid fuel. You know what it is? Water. Not exactly the kind of water we know, but almost. Check it out here. We're going to have a part with liquid hydrogen and a part with liquid oxygen. And yes, they're exactly the 2 chemical elements that we have in water. The moment we have oxygen reacting with hydrogen, it releases a lot of energy, a lot of heat. And then these gases expand like crazy. Yes, the result of this reaction between oxygen and hydrogen is water. That means what comes out of the mouth of this rocket, in the end, is water in the form of vapor, but it's still water. But let's start our journey then. Countdown. The rocket has lifted off. Not just with this main booster here, but also with these 2 auxiliary boosters on the sides. If you think they look a bit like the ones from the space shuttle, yes, they're kind of descendants of those boosters, but they're a bit bigger, okay? Here, it's not hydrogen with oxygen. It's a solid fuel. And right after this rocket gained some momentum, climbed a few dozen kilometers, these boosters, look, can I do this without messing everything up? They are discarded They're thrown into the sea in the space shuttle. This part here was reused, okay? So you could use the booster again. Not anymore. Now they're going to be thrown away. So we'll only have this part here, which keeps traveling. The rocket keeps going up. If you're wondering why it looks like a giant carrot, I wondered that too, and found out it's because they put foam, a thermal protection, around the fuel tanks. And that's necessary, not because it gets too hot, but actually the opposite. Because when you put the liquid hydrogen in here, it needs to be really cold. But when I say really cold, I mean really, really cold. It's minus 253 degrees Celsius, very close to absolute zero, which is the coldest temperature in the universe. So, if you don't protect it like a thermal box, what will happen? Ice will start to build up around the rocket while it's still on the launch pad. So you need to turn the rocket into a carrot. Back to our journey. After just 3 minutes of launch, another part will be discarded, which is this tip here. This little rocket at the front. It's an escape system. If, at the moment, when the astronauts are inside, whether it's before launch or right after launch, there's an explosion or a very serious malfunction, this is activated and takes the capsule with the astronauts away, like an ejection seat system in a fighter jet. But from that moment on, this part doesn't make much sense anymore, so it's discarded as well. A few minutes later, we pretty much don't have any air left, so it's possible to release this side protection here. This rocket fairing, and only 8 minutes after launch. Oh. Not this. Everything is so fragile. They don't make rockets like they used to. Continuing, 8 minutes after takeoff. All the carrot was already used up. There's no more hydrogen or oxygen in here. This part can already be discarded. It falls back to Earth, and what continues is just this part. This little rocket here also has its own name, which is Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, which stands for Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage. In other words, it's one of the rocket's stages and has this cryogenic name because it means very cold, since inside here there's also hydrogen with oxygen. This little rocket will put the whole assembly into an orbit far away from Earth. So, that means this assembly will be revolving around the Earth, but from far away, much farther than the International Space Station. By the way, it's worth telling you something sad. The astronauts who go to space today have pretty much only 3 destinations. They either do space tourism, which is just a brief trip up to space and back down, or they go to the only 2 space stations that are working today, which are the International Space Station, and Tiangong. How do you say it? The Chinese one. Yeah, hold on. Jiangguang. These flights that go up and down, they usually go a little over 100 kilometers in altitude, which is where we start to consider it space. And the space stations, they're about 400 kilometers above the ground. And what I think is kind of boring is that this is really close. They're in space, but 400 kilometers is just the distance from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro. It's quick to go there and come back. You can see these stations with the naked eye at night. The trip these guys are going to take is insanely good. The moon is 384,000 kilometers from Earth, and they're going beyond the moon. They're going to pass behind the moon. So the trip these guys are going to take is about 1,000 times longer than a trip to the International Space Station. This little set here is already going to orbit far from Earth. It's about 70,000 kilometers away, so it's already left the International Space Station far behind. And while they're in Earth's orbit, these spacecraft are going to disconnect. So the crew propulsion system is going to disconnect from the service module and the crew module here on Orion. But both parts keep traveling together, kind of playing tag. They're going to practice several dockings here to make sure everything is working. Do some training. They'll spend more than 24 hours orbiting the Earth and testing if everything is okay. If everything is ready to go to the moon, and then if everything is right, only this part here, just this little rocket, will burn the fuel and perform the so-called translunar injection, which means take off and head to the moon. Yes, let's go. They're already on their way to the moon, and I forgot to deploy the solar panels. Okay, that happens earlier, but anyway, at this point, the spacecraft is already kind of with its wings open, with these panels here, receiving energy from the sun. Is it steady? Okay, let's go to the moon. One cool thing here is that they're already flying. I mean, I don't even know if we can say they're flying because there's no air, but they're traveling in a region where there's no more air resistance, so the spacecraft can have this weird shape. And one more thing, you burn fuel. You fire the rocket for a very short period, okay? It's not like the rocket stays on all the way from here to the moon. No, you give it a push and the spacecraft keeps going. There's nothing to make it stop, and there's something really beautiful happening here along the way. This spacecraft, it's going up. It's strange for us to think about this, but it's moving away from Earth, which means it's getting farther and farther from the ground. Or thinking about it another way, the Earth wants the spacecraft back. The Earth is pulling the spacecraft back, but it's moving away. It's as if it's going up forever toward the moon, except the rocket is turned off, which means it's going up, but at some point, it's going to want to come down, right? Yes, that's right. When it gets close to the moon and goes around behind it, it kind of comes back on its own, falling toward the Earth. And if everything goes well, these panels won't come off, they'll stay right here. But anyway, there's a very precise calculation for this spacecraft to leave Earth and get close to the moon. The moon's gravity will pull the spacecraft, but it's not enough to make it land on the moon. So it falls back to Earth, kind of in a single motion. It's kind of like when we throw an object up and it falls back. But they haven't reached the moon yet. Come on, they're on their way. The trip takes 4 days. And when they get close to the moon will start to pull, so the spacecraft will start to go around the moon. They won't get that close, okay? The distance is about 7,000 kilometers, and this is where some really cool things start to happen. First, since they're going to pass behind the moon, there'll be humans seeing the far side of the moon. The moon orbits the Earth always with the same face turned toward us. It's like it rotates like this. It never turns this face away from the Earth. So, what's behind the moon? We've never seen in the entire history of humanity. The only people who have ever seen this with their own eyes are the astronauts who took part in the Apollo program. So, for the first time in 50 years, we're going to have human beings seeing the far side of the moon. One important thing for us to know is that this far side doesn't mean it's dark, okay? Quite the opposite. When we see the new moon here from Earth, it means the sun is shining on the other side, so it's a far side, but it's not a dark side. If it's in this phase of the moon, for example, they'll see all of this here, right? And they'll also see the moon's south pole, which is where the next Artemis missions want to land. Landing at the south pole is exciting since there could be water. It's colder and gets light differently. At that moment, when the astronauts are there, behind the moon, 7,000 kilometers away, they will be the humans who have gone the farthest from planet Earth. They will break the world record for distance from planet Earth. The previous record was from Apollo 13, that mission that couldn't land on the moon, but Artemis 2 intends to go even farther. Another thing that's going to happen, and I don't know exactly how they'll see it, is the Earthrise. They'll be able to see planet Earth rising behind the moon. And that's another view that only astronauts have the privilege to see. The first time this was recorded was on Apollo 8, which was a mission very similar to this one, and it happened before humans set foot on the moon. The guys went around the far side of our natural satellite, managed to see the Earth rising, and made it coincide with Christmas Eve. And this, for me, is one of the greatest marketing moves in all of human history. Because just imagine Christmas Eve. All the families gathered together. And suddenly, they started a live broadcast, a live transmission, there, behind the moon, at the moment when the Earth was rising, behind the moon. And then the guys opened the Bible and read Genesis, which is the beginning of the Bible, where it is written, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In other words, the guys were in the sky, seeing the Earth at that exact moment. Whoever had that idea deserves an Oscar, right? But anyway, on Artemis 2, it's a time to do a lot of experiments to test how the spacecraft is behaving and how the astronauts' bodies are reacting at that moment. Anyway, because this flight is exactly for that, for us to test everything. So next time we can do it for real. And then after all that, when they've already gone around the moon, Earth's gravity will start to take over and they'll come back. The return also takes about 4 days, okay? When they're getting close to Earth. Once again, there's a separation, this little white piece here, which is the service module, also called the European Service Module, because it was handled by the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency. It was built by Airbus. And besides being a little rocket, its function is also to serve as a kind of storage. So it collects energy inside. There's oxygen inside, there's water. But at this point, they're already almost arriving on Earth and don't need it anymore. And it's almost time for the most intense moment of all, which is re-entry. That's the moment when you have to put this capsule here exactly in the right position, because it's going to arrive at thousands of kilometers per hour and hit a thick layer of air below. And this impact of the capsule against the air causes the air molecules to be compressed with an absurd amount of force in front of the capsule. And this generates a temperature of about 3,000 degrees Celsius. So there's an insane heat shield, which is much stronger than that heat shield we made with the pineapple. It burns up as the spacecraft falls like a shooting star, and then, yes, this air resistance slows down the spacecraft until the moment comes when it can open the parachutes. And then it can start falling at a slightly more human speed. By the way, this little tip here is the only place where the astronauts will stay during the whole trip, but it's much more comfortable than the first trip to the moon was. There's about 60% more space. So to start with, instead of 3 people, this one can already fit 4. It has exercise equipment, and the bathroom is like a bus bathroom. Really cramped, but at least it has one, because the previous capsule didn't even have a bathroom. Now it's good to have a little bathroom, right? The arrival of the spacecraft at sea, which we can call Splashdown, is expected to happen in the Pacific Ocean. So they already know exactly where that's going to happen, and several ships, helicopters, and so on are already waiting for the astronauts there. But before making the splashdown in the water, let's get to know who these 4 people going to the moon are. The mission commander is an American named Reed Wiseman. He has already been to the International Space Station as a flight engineer on one of the expeditions. Also going is a woman named Christina Koch, who is an electrical engineer and physicist, and she holds the record for the longest space flight by a woman. There's also astronaut Victor Glover, who was the pilot of SpaceX's Crew 1 expedition, a guy who has also flown to the International Space Station, and the Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, who is a physicist and was also a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. The cool thing about this crew is that for the first time, we're going to have a woman. For the first time, we're going to have a black person. And for the first time, we're going to have someone who isn't American, a guy who was born in Canada. And these are the 4 people who, soon, in a few months, we might see floating in the Pacific Ocean coming out of the Orion capsule hatch on the Artemis 2 mission. I know that right now there are going to be a lot of people disappointed out there, complaining that they didn't step on the moon, that they didn't get their feet dirty with lunar dust. That's scheduled to happen on Artemis 3. But that flight is already very delayed. When I recorded the video talking about Artemis, the forecast was that this moon landing would happen in 2025. Bina, who was there recording with me, guessed that it would be delayed a bit and would happen in 2026. I said it would happen in 2027. But the latest news is that the lunar module, the spacecraft that actually lands on the moon, is kind of delayed, and maybe we'll get there in 2028. If I had to guess, 2029 or 2030. Let's say, in 2030, you can come back to this video to comment if I was right or not, deal. And now, it's my turn to put this thing back together. Right, it turned out great, but at the same time, it's kind of fragile. Nothing compared to the real rocket, which has way more problems than this one. But it's not one of the easiest tasks. If you're really into rockets, we recently published a video showing what the rocket competition at the Brazilian Astronomy and Astronautics Olympiad is like now. There's a Manual do Mundo category at the rocket exhibition with 2-stage rockets, meaning rockets that's separate in the air. And I'll give you a spoiler. They managed to break the record for the rocket that goes the farthest right in the first edition where this Manual do Mundo category was officially included. So, the rocket from the Brazilian Astronomy Olympiad that went the farthest is a rocket from the Manual do Mundo category. It's really worth watching this video because this competition is amazing. It wasn't that hard to assemble, right?